But yeah, so let's just jump right into the news stories here, shall we? Our first news story is that there's a reboot happening. Hey, surprise, surprise. What could be surprising you is that it's the Matrix. The Matrix is getting a reboot in the works over at Warner Brothers, and we're not exactly sure what will happen on the project, but it's in early development over at Warner Brothers. And right now, Zach Penn, who you pointed out, he is doing the reboot for or writing, sorry, Ready Player One. He's written um for Marvel, including the Avengers, and he wrote sci-fi superpowered show Alphas, and he's done what, X-Men: The Last Stand, X-Men
X-Men 2 and
2.
X-Men the Last Stand, Elektra,
Yeah,
um the Inspector Gadget movie, PCU, which was a movie that I really liked in the early 90s, which may be why he got some in with the Marvel crowd, because PCU had Jon Favreau as one of the people in it.
yeah.
Looks like his first screenwriting credit is listed as Last Action Hero, which Beat and I both admitted that we like way more than anybody possibly should. It's kind of like he's got some stuff on there that's at least enjoyable to somewhat great. Writing is always one of those things that you do the best story that you can, and then the execution may be something different, depending on how it lands up there. You can't say that X-Men 2 wasn't a great X-Men movie that met or exceeded expectations at the time that it came out, but then X-Men The Last Stand was a horrible piece of shit. But if it's the same guy writing both of them, there's some other factor that comes into place that
Yeah.
causes one to be great and the other one to be awful. So the question is does this guy have
Well,
the ability to do a Matrix movie, and why are we doing Matrix movies at this point?
yeah. And the other part that interests me, what interests me more than Zach Penn writing this, is this article right now says that the Wachowskis, who wrote and directed the original and the two sequels, are not involved in any nature for this reboot as
Not
for right
involved,
now.
not involved yet, and
Yeah,
that
yet.
doesn't mean that they wouldn't necessarily become involved, but it may also be that they would prefer not to be. They did their Matrix films, and it may also be that the Matrix is something that is an owned property by Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers doesn't have to involve them. Just like, I guess, Fox can do Buffy the Vampire Slayer without Joss Whedon, but why the fuck would they? Why would they do anything without the people who really created these things? I'm
And
still
that's the
kind
point.
of the mind of the Matrix was a fantastic movie, especially of its time. And then no sequels were ever made ever. But um but obviously they did, and the sequels were very successful. It's not necessarily as far as the fans are concerned, but as far as money that they made, they did very well. Beats pointing out that the Animatrix stories were better. I like the Animatrix a lot,
Yep.
but it's still like, what are we gonna get from doing another Matrix? It's 20 years old by the time that it would get made. At this point, it's not even 20 years old yet. Um, but I expect by the time that it would get together and come out and everything, a lot of the things that were in the Matrix that were so brand new to us then, like bullet time and the idea of living in a virtual reality thing and seeing that played out on the screen and downloading skills into your brain and all that stuff. While yes, there are certain people who run giant tech conglomerates now, may think that that's actually happening to us, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get the benefits of seeing it in a movie and enjoy it in the same way the first time again, like we did then. The Matrix, when it came out, was mind blowing.
Yeah.
You know, the effects were a huge jump. The ideas that it presented were original. It was pitched to kind of like be the, we want to make a superhero movie. This is the origin for our superhero. But we've now had superhero movies that are based off of comic books. You could argue The Matrix is actually Grant Morrison's Invisibles. A lot of people do argue that. I don't know what we would get out of doing a remake. It's, and I know I piss on remakes a lot. I piss on there's no original ideas anymore a lot. It bums me out that that's something that it just keeps being the first step. It's like, oh, we have this property, let's put it out there again and see what happens. The same day that this was basically leaked, they were also talking about a remake of The Fly, which itself was a remake. But I'm pretty sure they were talking about remaking the Jeff Goldblum version. And I'm just kind of, I'm tired of that personally, but it's not even that. It's just the Matrix world. Yes, if you go through the storyline, the thing just keeps repeating. That's what they give you in the second one. But if it keeps repeating, then you want to fucking see Neo, and you want to see Trinity, and you want to see Morpheus. You want to see these characters who all had their journeys already.
This is where, and I should point out that some of the other things right now is that Michael B. Jordan is attached to be involved, you know, is starring in the movie. And I would almost say that I would rather they not reboot the series, but have it in the same universe, almost like you know, like relaunching the series without having to be like, okay, here's our universe, you know, like whether it be a prequel and we get young Morpheus, which I don't really like prequels that much because we know the ending ultimately.
Yeah, it
But do
becomes
this where
whatever that Walking Dead prequel series is. It's the same
yeah,
idea of like,
it becomes Fear the Walking Dead. It becomes, you know, Star Wars episodes 1, 2, and 3 and stuff like that.
or I mean, arguably, it's Star Wars Rogue One, which is a prequel, but did something different. So it's
Yeah.
possible. It's absolutely possible. It Rogue One is a prequel that is not about the same characters for the most part. There's appearances and it ties in, but it sort of zigzags out of what we had expectations of from Star Wars already.
Yeah.
And that's something that they could do with this. I'm not jumping up and down to get back into that world, because the cool stuff of the Matrix was the stuff that happened inside the Matrix.
Mhm.
And when they started focusing more outside of the Matrix, I think is when it became dull and like just it lost the excitement for me. It's like, one,
Yeah.
I don't need to see a 20-minute orgy scene with club music playing, but two, it's just like all the stuff that happened when they were hanging out in the ship was just them hanging out in the ship until like the guys pulling their plugs and stuff, but it's still all related to the Matrix. And the first one, it was about what they could do in the Matrix. And then, yeah, they got attacked outside of it by the machines and stuff, and they had to use the EMP. And that was fine. But the more time they spent away from inside where they could do things, where they had the powers and the bullet time and the vehicles and the weapons and all that stuff, it just wasn't nearly as cool. Like even with mech suits and stuff that they had and robots kind of like swarming into the land, it just wasn't as appealing to me as seeing all the kung fu shit going on with Neo and Agent Smith and everything else. And so,
Yeah.
but those things are what we have an expectation of the Matrix from now. And those are things that we see in other superhero films and other action films to a heavy degree. You can't say there's not Matrix style stunts going on in the Fast and the Furious franchise at this point. What is really going to make us want to go back into that setting again that is going to, one, require it to be the Matrix so that it sells us on the fact that, okay, this is a connected world, but then also excites us like something brand new and interesting as opposed to the same thing done over again. Like, I was already done with Bullet Time by the time I was seeing stuff like Christian Bale in Equilibrium doing the Gunkata stuff that I thought was like, people were saying, oh, this is like the new Matrix, which it wasn't anything like the Matrix at all, but it was taking some of the kinds of concepts and movements and ideas and applying them to something else in a more interesting way than everybody just like bending over backwards and shit and ducking bullets.
No, definitely. I'll be really interested to hear how this develops, what it will really be, because I think that will determine, in my opinion, its success or its failure. But we should probably move on to our next story, and that is about a comic book TV show that involves the Russos. The Russo brothers will be producing a Quantum and Woody TV series after Avengers Infinity War. For those of you guys who do not know who the Russo brothers are, and you do not watch movies, they worked on Community. They've done other things that I cannot think of right now because I'm going off the top of my head. But they worked on in movies. They worked on Avengers Infinity War, which is coming up next year. They did Captain America: The Winter Soldier, Captain America: Civil War, and their next project after Infinity War is actually going to be this Quantum and Woody TV series with Valiant Entertainment about the world's worst super duo. Do you know about Quantum and Woody?
Yeah, I was more into Quantum and Woody with the original version from Valiant from years ago that Christopher Priest was the writer on, and I think MD Bright. Yeah, it says it in the notes. MD Bright was the artist for. Quantum and Woody is it's like a buddy action type thing. It's these two guys. They only have powers when they are connected to each other, basically by holding hands. But they are totally at odds with one another. Like, one of them is a very serious, cool, would be the badass superhero, and the other guy is kind of like the fuck around. And I remember them hanging out with a goat. It was just like weird, funny shit. You gotta love Priest's writing. Priest is excellent stuff. It seems like a really fun thing to do, and it could make a good series. And I've been watching things like I mentioned not too long ago, that Hap and Leonard series that I was watching. I watched Terriers a little while before that, reviewed that on here. I like that sort of buddy, like, bickering back and forth. Lethal Weapon is a great example of that. Any of the Shane Black stuff that he's done, be it Kiss Kiss Bang Bang or The Nice Guys, would also lend itself to kind of the idea that you would get here with these characters. That all sounds like a lot of fun. Adding in the superhero stuff means that you get a way to amp up the action instead of having it be typical to the other stuff that you're seeing on TV right now. It depends, I guess, on where it's going to land. It depends also on how big their involvement is going to be, because they are pretty sought after in Hollywood right now by doing Winter Soldier and then Civil War, and now taking over Marvel's biggest franchise with the Avengers films, the next two. So it's kind of a big deal that they're willing to do anything with television at this point at all. Although Abrams does. J.J. Abrams continues to develop stuff for TV while he's doing other films, big films like, Star Trek and Star Wars and shit. I'm intrigued. I'm also intrigued because Valiant's pushing more to get stuff out there too. They're the next superhero universe that's probably going to come into play, because there's not a lot of superhero universes. There's other comic book stuff that could make it to films, but as far as superheroes goes, it's been Marvel and DC, and now Valiant is finally going to do some stuff too.
And and that's probably the smart thing with that, though, because Valiant, they had talked about this before. Like, they got the Ninjak in development. I think that's going to be a movie, but it's not like they're going strictly the Marvel Cinematic Universe route. and getting stuff set up there and then trickling down to TV. It's almost, where do we see these characters fitting in best? So it's like, whether it be, Archer and Armstrong, it's like, oh, well, I think that one could probably be more of a, like, the ideas we're getting are more movie based than TV show, or, and Quantum and Woody, well, we got a whole bunch of ideas, and instead of, dragging them out, in like movies that go over the course of like 5-10 years, we'll do it on a TV show, and all that, and that makes sense to me. That honestly makes the most sense.
Yeah, and nothing I think has been said about whether or not the Valiant universe stuff is going to be interconnected in the way that Marvel is so far, or that DC said that they weren't, but then all their films are. It's just their TV stuff that isn't. But then their TV stuff, most of it seems to interact with each other at this point. And Valiant is lucky because most of their properties, while they've laid it out and they could have them interact with each other, and they do on occasion, they don't rely on each other. It's not like all the superheroes hanging out in New York for some buttfuck reason. It's not, oh, well, half of these characters are mutants, but we sold mutants to this other production company, and half of these characters are related to the Fantastic Four, and oh, they're also with those mutants over at that company, and we can't use any of them. And then this guy in the spider suit, he belongs to Sony, and Universal has the rights of distribution for the Hulk. Valiant doesn't have any of that shit to deal with. So if they want to have the things interrelate, they can, but they don't have to, and there's not an expectation. Like, you have an expectation, whether it's been done or not, of, well, I see Spider-Man, but why don't I see Spider-Man hanging out with the X-Men? And why don't I see the Fantastic Four hanging out with the Avengers? Why isn't that happening? Because they're all Marvel characters. I don't think the audience is going to have that kind of like implied hope of seeing Archer and Armstrong show up on Quantum and Woody, and then have them show up in Ninjak, and then have them show up with Bloodshot. I don't think they're going to care as much because they're not the big universe established that we've all read for 70 years. Valiant's been around a long time, but they're still a very small company in comparison to the other ones. And the fan base is strictly like comic fans at this point.
Yeah. But again, I'm excited to see this because, like, I'd be curious to know where it could end up going, and if it will be successful. But we should probably move on to our final story for the segment, and it is Star Wars story, and it is this is from comingsoon.net, where they had an exclusive one-on-one chat with Gary Whitta, the screenwriter who co-wrote the story of Rogue One. And he basically says that these interstitial movies between the episode movies, so episode 7, 8, 9, after young Han Solo, is not going to rely on legacy characters.
After a certain point.
After a certain point, it's not going to be. Go ahead.
I think that we already kind of, it's been heavily implied that there's going to be a Boba Fett movie. But I think what he's saying is not that we're not going to see a relationship to some of these legacy ideas, but that at some point we can't just keep doing that. It can't constantly be the Skywalker clan. It can't constantly be Vader showing up. It can't constantly be Jedis and lightsabers, because at some point or another, that's going to, you're going to lose interest. In the same way I was talking about the Matrix stuff earlier, is like, there's an element to the Matrix that you want to see, and then there's also a staleness to it because you've seen it. Star Wars, we're excited to see these things back because it is a huge amount of nostalgia for many generations, for multiple generations, because I saw them when I was a kid, and then kids years later saw the prequels, and they were their Star Wars, and then they got to discover the stuff that I watched, and now we've got the newer films, and there's a whole new generation seeing that. So obviously, it's not like none of that stuff can happen again, but should it only be that? And that's something I've talked about on here before, is why would you limit yourself to one very small pocket of what is an infinite universe of ideas and characters and concepts and stories? And that's what I found great about Rogue One, is that there was this whole new slew of characters and this whole new concept to happen. That, yeah, they had cameos by a couple of the characters that we knew, by some actors that we knew and everything, but it was something different, and it wasn't about them, and it wasn't about Luke or even Leia, although she had her time in it. It wasn't about Vader. It wasn't about the legacy of Vader. It was something else that made sense in the context, but still got to be its own thing. And I think that that's, to me, that's so fascinating and so much more intriguing as a fan. And I think for creators, it's intriguing too. That's the expectations, that's what we're going to start to see more of. And they had to kind of hedge their bets in doing it. You know, it's like, well, will an audience buy into this? Will this be successful if we don't see lightsabers? And we didn't see one in Rogue One until Vader showed up, you know, and it wasn't like we got a lightsaber battle. We got things that were kind of implied of like, oh, this guy might have been a Jedi or something, but he never pulled out a lightsaber. It did something different, and the audience still loved it.
Yeah. No, I mean, and like I agree with all this. And yes, I did misspeak. The last question that was in the article was from comingsoon.net. It would be cool to, or well, more of a statement. It would be cool to see something totally new without the baggage of should Vader do this or should Vader do that. With Gary Whitta responding, yeah, I quite agree. I'm speaking purely as a fan. I obviously have no idea what their plans are for the franchise. I did my small piece of it, but it makes sense to me that you don't want to keep telling the same stories over and over again. You want to tell new stories. And that's honestly what I think is going to happen. You're going to have this moment where either they're going to do one of two things, where they do a Star Wars Legends story and start pulling stuff from the books that they've made in, you know, that are no longer considered canon, or it's going to be someone doing something that's in the universe but doesn't involve, you know, maybe it might involve a tertiary character that you might have seen in you know, the background of, you know, the cantina or something like that, but not, well, here's the Skywalkers over here, and if you look carefully, you could see the Darth Vader, or you know, anything like that. It's gonna break. It needs to break away, because after a while, it's just it will get boring.
Yeah, and like you're saying about it, the Star Wars Legends, that's part of the thing too, is that if there's stories that we've already seen or read as part of Legends or whatever, then why do we just want to see that redone again on the screen? I saw a lot of people posting in relation to this article, like, well, I want to see a Vader movie. And it's like, well, god damn, we've had 6 fucking Vader movies. Or I want to see a young Obi-Wan movie. Well, we had 3 young Obi-Wan movies. And then we had the Obi-Wan
shows.
Right. There's been a lot of these things, and I don't begrudge the idea of like, well, Ewan McGregor could do some really kick-ass shit as Obi-Wan that maybe they didn't utilize him well enough in the prequels. I don't have a huge problem with that, but I'm just like, but you're limiting your excitement to things that you've already experienced. And I guess that's realistically, that's what Hollywood does and believes. And if the fans keep screaming for it, I can't put too much blame on them for the fact that that's the well they keep going back to. because people want to keep reading the same books over and over, and they want to keep seeing the same shows over and over. And you just like dress it up slightly differently, but you keep giving them the same thing. And maybe that's true. Maybe that is what we're going to see. But I think that Rogue One allowed us to know that maybe we can get something more as well. And that was, like I said, it was still a lot of safety net on that movie.
Yeah.
But I think that their hope and their expectation, because they want to make these things forever. Disney does not look at this as a Skywalker franchise. Disney looks at this as the Star Wars franchise. And so they're going to try to expand this as far and wide as they can and just keep making money off of it. And Disney's not afraid to make new characters, because Disney made you care about fucking dolls and made you care about fucking bugs and made you care about fucking monsters and cars and shit. Disney has the capability of introducing new characters to you and getting you into it in a way that you probably never would have expected to be. They can do a lot of crazy shit with Star Wars with the right people in place, and they know how to pick good people. So I think that there should be no lowered expectations. It's like anything you can imagine can probably fucking happen at this point, and that's awesome.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I'm gonna partially quote Beat because on something here, and he puts, Disney cares about dolls, except maybe for some female characters. Where it's true in the olden times, I feel like they've gotten better with that, or at least I hope they have gotten better with that. But yeah, I mean, it's only a logical sense here. I mean, Gary Whitta, where he is speaking for himself again, this is a logical choice. This isn't, well, I don't know. I mean, like he's not necessarily talking out of turn here. But, again, this is one of those only time will tell things. But yeah, that is going to do it for the news, and we will be right back.